Welcome everyone. So in this video, I'm going to give an overview of some of the important legal structures for entrepreneurs to be aware of. And I mean it that way. Like, this is going to be sort of a topical overview. If you're actually doing this for real, you would want to consult with a business attorney. My plan here as an economist is kind of make us aware of some of these different designations, different legal structures for new businesses as sort of a general introduction to these things. There's a lot more to go into than what I'll cover here. I'm covering sort of the minimal amount that we need in an economics of entrepreneurship class. And so that's the idea. All right. So in terms of the legal structures for businesses, I'll talk about the basic forms, so sole proprietorship, partnership, corporation. Think about some of the more recent forms like limited partnerships, limited liability companies, and S-corps. All right. So the key things to think about are the liability issues and the taxes. And the tax data that I'm going to have is just sort of ballpark figures. Even in the last year, these things have changed a little bit. And so, the tax percentages that I've got on the slides, you'll want to actually verify them. But I would never ask a question about like what's the tax rate associated with. Yeah, that's a stupid question. You can just Google it. You just Google it. And so anyway, so in terms of deciding which legal structure is right for your company, kind of the key things to think about, however, are liability issues and then the relevant taxation structure. All right, so the first thing to think about is sole proprietorship. So first thing, well, it's not a separate legal entity. The owner is indeed the business, which creates some limitations. The advantages are, well, it's really easy to form. There's typically no registration fees. This is also a disadvantage because people can form a sole proprietorship in some sense without realizing that they have. So that's a problem. Profits are, in terms of taxation, this is really easy. The profits pass through directly from the business to the owner and are taxed as personal income. So there's no federal corporate business tax. So for the structure, it would have to pay some percentage of self-employment tax on the first amount of income. Another advantage is the losses could be deducted from other personal income sources. So in terms of sole proprietorship, basically the key advantage relative to the things I said that are important, taxes and liability, key advantage is taxes, right? So there's tax advantages. Key problems, liability. So there's no limited liability. The individual proprietor is responsible for all the business debts. Also, there's a lack of continuity. If the owner dies, well, the business disappears. The assets would go to the estate. There's complicated legal things that you could do to try to make the business continue, but super complicated. So also not really possible to raise equity capital because there's not a separate legal entity. The owner is the business. And so difficult to sell a share of the business when you are the business. Partnership is similar to sole proprietorship, except now you've got partners. You've got more than one person. Again, not a separate legal entity, which creates additional problems. Here you'd need a detailed contract stating how profits would be distributed, and you'd for sure be meeting with a business attorney, especially someone who specializes in contracts, like the attorney on my channel page, my brother. Advantages, so it's again fairly easy to form. Profits pass through. There's no federal corporate taxes, and so this is good. So from the standpoint of taxes, there's advantages to partnerships. There's some key disadvantages. No limited liability, really important here because you're now liable for things your partner does. Also, there's problems with lack of continuity if something happens to one partner, because now, well, you've got the other partner who's got to decide what to do. Some of the problems can be mitigated with different types of things in the contract, but that can be really complicated. Again, really difficult to obtain equity financing because the partners are now indistinguishable from the firm itself, right? From the company itself. There's not a separate legal entity. So difficult to raise equity financing. Corporations, however, so corporations now are indeed separate legal entities from their owners. The idea here is you have this artificial, invisible, intangible, existing only in the contemplation of the law with a business charter, right? So the corporation, as a result, insulates the owners from the debts of the company. There's limited liability. Also, the ownership can be easily transferred,
right? You can sell shares, good for equity. And if something happens to an owner, the company continues. There's an unlimited life for the corporation. So there's some key advantages. Now there's some disadvantages for corporations. Well, it's more complicated to form than other structures. For sure, you're meeting with a business attorney, and perhaps given the size, maybe use a team of attorneys. Issues of double taxation, so it can be difficult. So distributed profits typically get taxed twice. Once as corporate profits, second as the profits get distributed to owners as dividends. So you'd want to go and check recent tax policy as these things change, but that's sort of the basic idea. But smaller corporations might be able to get around some of these issues by paying out profits as wages to owners, retaining income for future growth, though that'd be eventually taxed, and then transfer pricing between subsidiaries of big corporations. So this is like thinking about when you've got several different business operations under one corporation, and thinking about funds and resources exchange between those holdings under the same umbrella. In terms of other structures that are more likely for entrepreneur, so some of the newer legal forms, limited partnerships. We've mentioned this a little bit, talking about venture capital, and then LLCs, and then SCorps. All of these, in some sense, combine the tax advantages of non-corporations, such as partners and sole proprietorships, and the limited liability advantages of traditional corporations, of C-corps. And so I view these as a little bit more reasonable for a startup. The LP, the limited partnership, this is a partnership with two classes of partners. You have general partners and you have limited partners. Our general partners don't have limited liability, but the limited partners do. So this can be good for getting outside funding while retaining control of the business, because limited partners who would give anything other than funds would lose their protection as limited partners and now become general partners, right? If the limited partners provide anything other than funds to the company, they lose their limited liability. There's the same tax advantages as ordinary partnerships, and can be very flexible in terms of distribution of profits. And so that's sort of an advantage to a limited partnership. Now, LLCs, I think, is the most exciting amongst all of these, if not SCorp. So LLCs are relatively recent. We do allow single owner LLCs in Michigan, but are not allowed and or are risky in some other states. So the laws can subject to change. It's new relative to these sort of older, sort of historic business structures, and so things can change. On the other hand, LLCs are very flexible in terms of decision-making distributions. There's a pass-through taxation of profits, just like a partnership. And in theory, the limited liability of corporations will often, in theory, they have the limited liability of corporations, though not a true corporation. Let's see, we'll often need to personally guarantee loans if you have a LLC. In terms of S-corps, well, C-corp is a particular section of the IRS tax code, and S-corp is another section of the IRS tax code. That's why I like S-corp and C-corp. S-corps have limited liability just like a normal C-corp. They're actually corporations, unlike LLCs and unlike LPs. However, they have this pass-through taxation like a partnership, which can be nice. So like the LLC, we have an advantage relative to the C-corp on distributed income. The advantage of S-corps over LLCs is you don't need to pay the self-employment tax on pass-through profits for the first $100,000 or so. However, S-corps are typically not as flexible as LLCs and LPs. Profits need to be distributed according to shareholding, and there's some other limitations, such as being domestic. Shareholders must be individuals. You cannot have shareholders that are other corporations or partnerships, and you need to have 75 or fewer stockholders with one class of stock. Otherwise, like, what would be the alternative? Well, don't be an S-corp, be a C-corp. If an existing corporation satisfies these requirements, you can file with the IRS for S-corp status. In terms of state taxes, varies across states, so there's a lot of this changes all the time. So I was like, why bother? So you'd want to look at the state tax at the state tax implications for your particular structure, especially now that I post this. So check
look up the state, look up the ever-changing tax policy that's most relevant to you. In terms of summary, so thinking about the important ideas from legal structures, well, if you have a small business with no outside financing, could go with a sole proprietorship, partnership, or LLC. If you have a larger business, such as large number of owners with no outside funding, probably you're looking at LLC, SCorp, maybe SCorp. If you have a larger business and need outside funding, now you're probably looking at a limited partnership, an LLC, or a SCorp. Obviously, consult with tax lawyers or accountants for your particular business type in your particular state. Can't emphasize that enough. The other thing that I'd say is, look, LLC shows up in a lot of different places. So LLC seems to be a relatively reasonable structure. And so personally, so I'm not an attorney, not an accountant, but I would do so rather than doing a sole proprietorship, rather than doing a partner, you look at in each of these cases where you have some type of partnership, there's also LLC. So that seems, at least to my mind, a relatively reasonable structure for a firm, or for a startup. But like I said, this is my final advice, which is, if you're doing this for real, consult with a business attorney, tax lawyer, so on and so forth, to make sure that you do it right. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time.